In today's video, we will discuss 3 examples of Jesus dealing with the topic of homosexuality. This is the first example from Matthew chapter 5, and this is Jesus here in verse 31 giving his famous Sermon on the Mount, and he says, "It hath been said," right, referring back to the Old Testament in Deuteronomy, "Whosoever shall put away his wife," so divorce his wife, "let him give her a writing of divorcement. But I say unto you that whosoever shall put away his wife, saving except for the case of fornication, causeth her to commit adultery, and whosoever shall marry her that is divorced committeth adultery as well." So looking at this first example here from Matthew chapter 5, some people may look at this passage and say, well, Israel, this has nothing to do with same-sex marriage or anything along those lines. And the fact of the matter is, you can discuss something in a direct way, or you can also discuss something in a implied way or an inferred way. So for example, if someone said to me, or if someone said at some point in time, how many sisters did Israel have? And every time you heard me speak, I never said anything about having any sisters, but I always said something along the lines of, you know what, I'm the youngest of 4 boys, or I've got 3 brothers, or things along those lines. I may not directly be speaking about not having sisters, but it's quite clearly implied and inferred that Israel has no sisters and he only has brothers. In like manner, just like we looked at Jesus here in Matthew chapter 5, by him speaking about marriage specifically as a relationship between a man and a woman, we know as Christians that marriage is the only union between man and a woman that God accepts. I'm going to give you another example in Matthew, but I want to do a little cross-reference here because this will also give you better insights. The second example I want to give you is from the gospel account of Mark. And this is where the religious leaders, as you can see here in verse 2, the Pharisees, Mark 10 verse 2, came and asked Jesus about marriage and divorce. And they basically are arguing with Jesus, talking about why did Moses give the law of divorce. Jesus here talks clearly and says these laws were given to you because you were basically wicked, you had a hard heart. And he goes on to say something really interesting. He says, but from the beginning of the creation, God made them male and female. And then what does he go on to say? He says, and for this cause shall a man leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife, and the two of them shall be one flesh. So notice the implications and the inferences there. From the beginning of the creation, God made male and female. We know this going back to Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. That a male is to leave his father and his mother and to cleave to his wife, and the two of them become one flesh. Jesus is clearly insinuating here that marriage is in God's sight from the beginning of the creation between man and a woman. Now, the reason I wanted to go to this particular passage as well is because as you scroll down, what does Jesus continue to say, right? This is a second example with his disciples speaking with him privately. It says they spoke to him again about this matter. And what did he say to them? He says, whoever puts away a wife and marries another commits adultery. But what does he say? And if a woman shall put away her husband and be married to another, she committeth adultery. So in both examples, Jesus gives it from both avenues. A man that puts away a wife, or a woman who decides to put away a husband, but not a man who puts away a husband or a wife who puts away a wife or anything along those lines. Jesus is quite clear. This, as you can see, is basically the same account in Matthew 19, but there was something interesting I want to highlight from this particular passage, which I think is actually quite interesting. Notice what Jesus says as we move down this particular passage. 29 says, and everyone that has forsaken houses or brethren or sisters or father or mother, or notice this, wife or children or lands for my name's sake shall receive 100-fold and shall inherit everlasting life. Notice what Jesus is putting in this whole category here. Family, friends, goods, land, but also at the same time, a spouse. Obviously, when you think back to the context of what he was speaking about earlier on in Matthew chapter 9, and we looked at it from Mark's account, that was clear that the wife would obviously be the wife of a husband. Notice what we're seeing here. This comes later on in Matthew's gospel account, and this is where, as you can see, the Bible talks about Sadducees coming and asking Jesus about the resurrection. And again, this is on the context, the topic of marriage. And notice how they frame this particular question. They say, Moses said, right, going back to the Old Testament, if a man dies having no children, his brother shall marry his wife and raise up seed unto his brother. And notice, as you go down to verse 28, what do they ask? Whose wife shall she be of the 7? For they all had her. So notice the implication that the Sadducees are trying to present. They don't believe in the resurrection, just for the record, but they're asking Jesus a question about the resurrection, and it's not about a same-sex union or anything along those lines. It's following the same context of relationships that has been from the beginning of Matthew up until this point. A man married to a woman, and even they're trying to bring an extreme case here of a man, multiple men married to the same woman, one after the other, after each man dies. Now, Jesus obviously confounds this foolish argument from the Sadducees by correcting them and getting them to realize that there's no marriage, right, in that point in time. But the fact of the matter is, Jesus never implies or infers that people of the same sex can be married and it be acceptable in God's eyes. It's quite the contrary. We just looked at 3 examples in today's video where Jesus is clearly implying and inferring that marriage in God's eyes from the beginning is seen as a man and a woman. It wouldn't be wise for us to single out any particular group and isolate them as if we are better than them because we are Christians. The Bible even talks about in 1 Corinthians that there were some people that were in that lifestyle who ultimately came out. Despite all of these clear passages from Jesus on the topic and even things in the broader New Testament scriptures, you still get people professing to be Christians but trying to live in an outward, openly homosexual lifestyle. And when they decide that it's time for them to get married, should we actually attend as Christians? Here's my thoughts.